I thought I would start my talk this afternoon with a history lesson, and I thought out of that there can be a few lessons that we would pick up, and maybe then that becomes the basis for our dialogue. I work for the Maritime Safety Authority, that is called SAMSA, and we started a process where we were looking at the strategy going forward. And in that we were guided by two things, the national dialogue that is there, the main one being the National Development Plan. What we liked about the National Development Plan is that it is a roadmap to 2030. It's got a time limit, 2030, that's what it has. And then we were guided by the Maritime Transport Policy by the Department of Transport. And what appealed to us there is one area that talks to building South Africa as an international maritime center. So for our strategy between now and 2030, we've said we will assist South Africa to become an international maritime center by 2030. We've taken a step to define what we mean by that international maritime center, and we had two attributes for that. On the one hand, we said we will try and build we'll build a SAMSA into a proper maritime authority, world-class, give us any qualifier, but it will be a recognized maritime authority. On the other hand, we said we will help South Africa to build a vibrant maritime economy, and then we needed to define what we mean by that. And we thought what we would mean from a SAMSA perspective about a vibrant maritime economy is one, an economy that creates jobs. So our indicator is just simply count the number of people that are employed there. And secondly, an economy that contributes positively to South Africa's GDP. So give us a number of entities, SMMEs, big corporates, whatever, what it is that they turn over and how much of that goes to the national economy. So those are the two parts, and such then drives our understanding of the future and all our efforts into the future. Now, I thought coming here today, we would wish to give some historical context. I'm a student of history whenever I go back to school. That's what I will do, so I'm a future student of history, so we'll try this one. I've spoken about that, I've spoken about that, I've spoken about that. Now, guiding our thinking, if you go to the African Union Agenda 2063, that's another document that guides us. If you go to Article 15, it talks about this blue economy that will be a major contributor to continental transformation and growth. It speaks about climate change. Now, the one key part is on the integrated continent, which talks about the free movement of people, capital, goods, and services. Now, what do those goods in particular require? They require maritime transport, exists in our view. If you go to Article 25, it talks about the infrastructure, shipping, railway networks, etc. If you go to Article 26, then that talks about that free trade agreement that has been passed. Now, this is a document that's dated early in this decade. Now, such are the things that we need to do, and I beg colleagues to go and look at that so that I can come to talk about what we need to talk about. So we pass this year. Then on the National Development Plan, there is a call to employers to be offered an incentive for reduced initial cost of hiring. Now, that's exactly what we had in mind when we were doing some of the things that we were doing. And it talks about economic infrastructure, liquefied natural gas, and all of that, which requires us to think about what skills are then required to drive this envisaged economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to build a case for us to think about later on. Then there's one part that I like a lot, that the need for us to articulate South African interests The SAMSA objective is to promote South Africa's maritime interest. So the whole issue about what it is that we shall deem our interest is one discussion that we can never shy away from, and that should form the basis of all our discussions. We talk about the developmental state, so I will move past this very quickly. Now, when we get to seafaring, which in our view has a big part to support the aspirations of the country in the manner I've just demonstrated. We spoke to the Master Mariners Association, what do they call it, the Nautical Institute. They have picked up some of these quotes in our general conversations. The one says, the sea is a harsh, unforgiving environment and takes a special breed of person to make it their career. Seafaring is not just a job, it is a way of life. To attract and retain people who are prepared to accept this way of life has always been and will always be a challenge. I'll paraphrase that last part. Somebody else says seafaring is part theory, which theory can be learned, and part skill, which is the practical part. Somebody else says seamanship can broadly be defined as the knowledge and skill pertaining to the operation, navigation, management, safety, and maintenance of a ship. These are things that you all know about. It is a very difficult concept to define fully, and the skill itself does not occur naturally in everyone. Seafarers say amen to that? Amen. So you would agree with me. And then I thought I would want to take you through a journey, a historical journey about the seafaring in South Africa. You all know Captain Davis. He buys a river-class cruiser, HMS Thames, and he donates it to the South African government. And in 1922, the ship is commissioned, anchored in the Bay of Simonstown. Takes trainees on board on a full residential study. This is all pre-matric at the time. Now, you would recall that before then, all training had to take place in the UK. So whoever wanted to be a seafarer coming from the colony would have had to catch a ship to go to the UK, get trained, do their 4 years sea time, and then would come back and become seafarers. Now, that ship then gets moved around. World War II starts, fear of these torpedoes. That gets moved then to a facility ashore. And then at some stage, the pre-matric courses are replaced by post-matric courses. And then it changes names until it becomes the Cape Peninsula University of Technology in 2005. Now, such has been the evolution of maritime training as we know it. Key issues there is that it had to be resident, there had to be, at some stage, the pre-learning to expose people out to go to sea before they undertook the balance of their training. And I'll tell you why that becomes important. Now, that history was for nautical training. And when eventually it moved to the current Granger Bay, it was still purely nautical training and nothing else until it became the part of the Cape Technical. Now, the technical, the engineering approach was always following a vocational approach. Started in the 1970s, the Cape Technical College, they commenced with their engineering training and radio officer training. And then there was the history that we needed to confront, that there was another set up for colors. This was all for whites at the time. Now, the Training Center for Seamen was established under the tricameral period, some of you would recall. It was called the Department of Colored Affairs. Now, that provided another training set up, which became another path. Now, both those got merged by the time we moved closer. In fact, it was even post the establishment of Ranger Bay. And then realizing that there was a need for pre-matric exposure to maritime, then there was the establishment of the Low Hill Maritime Center. That is the part of the training. Now the absorption side. In 1910, Greenrod established in South Africa with the officers who actually trained in the UK. 1946, submarine gets established. 1947, they start trading. Now in the 1950s, with all the boom, the post-war economic boom, South Africa's economy quite expands. Until 1974, when it gets kicked out of the United Nations system because of the apartheid policy. Now, what then happened at that point is that all the seafarers that were there, most of which were holding passports that were not South African, but those that were stuck to South Africa, only became available to South African shipping interests to be absorbed as such. Now, that then created a market, because remember you would have had Greenrod, submarine, harbour service, absorbing all these skills. And until an almost unrelated event, when the anti-apartheid lobby started to take root, then the South African government deemed it important to offshore some of these shipping services. So all of a sudden we had operations that were based elsewhere. But then that reduced the actual size of the fleet registered in the country. So that's where the dwindling started. And then you had an unrelated event, that of exchange control, which then allowed or enabled or led to Greenrod, MUR Shipping, which were the other companies that were operating from the country, to offshore their ships and services. Now that took away a whole lot of capacity to absorb. At the time, you had just had South Africa being readmitted into the UN system. So the highly trained technical staff was able to get jobs elsewhere anyways. So, now, the only employer of seafarers at that point would then become the harbour service. And now, those of you who are coming from that history, and there's quite a handful of you in the room would recall that there was a requirement that in order for you to be a port captain, marine pilot, tug master, you had to have a class 1 COC. But that was a problem for transformation. So a decision was made by the harbour service to say, downgrade these skills. So the only other mandatory absorption point for South African seafarers then had to be content with a class 3 certificate of competence. And the shipping that was the main absorber of skills itself was offshore. So we started running into this conundrum come that point in time. And then when government was confronted with this in around 2008 now, we needed to go back and check what was left. And what was left was a robust theoretical training system, which itself was getting compromised. Those of you that went to training, that were in charge of training, and there's quite a handful of you in the room, know that you already were running the two institutions at the time, CPUT and DUT, with largely retired staff. But there was no means of the system producing any of the other skills. You had a National Ports Authority that was still committed to building skills, but it was for their own requirements, and their requirements were now kept at less than the class 1 level that's required. However, you still had a good reputation of South African seafarers. What was not there? You didn't have a flag carrier to support cadetship leg of the program. You didn't have any industry employer who was committed to providing employment. Because you must remember, that employment on a South African ship is enabled in terms of your training and merchant training regulations on the Merchant Shipping Act, which says that only a South African holder of a ticket or a ticket issued in South Africa is allowed to man a South African ship unless the authority grants approval to deviate. I'm paraphrasing it. Now, without that, there is nobody, there's no way of holding anybody legally forcing them to employ South African seafarers. So those of you that are wondering why is it that we're punting the growth of the register, it is the only means we have to employ South African seafarers. Otherwise, there is no other way. I'm going to run very, very quickly. Now, confronted with this, we needed to figure out what else to be done. Now, you needed to establish the cadetship leg of the training because every other part was holding. We then approached people, those that were linked to the South African trade, these ships that call here, spoke to Asapos, and I think they changed their name now to Sasowa, and others to say, please take South Africans. That didn't work. We then said, no, fine, we'll pay you. Please take them. That didn't work. So then we arrived at that first national cadetship program. And then parallel to that, you needed to ensure that you guarantee this training. So we went for the training vessel, the Agalas. There was a maritime skills study that was commissioned. And then there was a very important work that we don't mention a lot. There was a technical task team on maritime sector skills that was established under the presidency, secretariat of whom is the Department of Higher Education and Training. In fact, I see my boss here. I put this before I saw you, ma'am, so she was my boss at the time, Sis Brenda. So that work produced for the first time a product that could be brought to government to say, can we not do these things? And 2014 to 2019 Operation Pakistan started, and those recommendations from both the skills study and that maritime sector skills report went through the system, and that led to the formation of SAIMI. At that time, because it was not working to engage with seafarers, sort of shipping companies that are doing work with South Africa, it became appropriate that South Africa should approach others whose trade was not necessarily linked to South Africa. I can think about Clubless Shipping. There's one other shipping company that we dealt with, Sispan is their name. And then for the first time, we then had one ship coming in on the register owned by Vuka, and this is now 2015. For the first time then, we had the legal means to force somebody to employ South Africans. Imagine employing South Africans on one ship. But that was a good start. And this is in the context of maritime skills. So a whole lot of other work had to go in to grow the industry, parallel to us having capacity to produce these skills. Now, where are we currently? We do know, and I didn't put the BIMCO report, the rider is that you're all coming from the sector, so we know what there is to offer, what's going on. BIMCO report talks about a huge potential. Now, we know that South Africa is a good value proposition. Our seafarers have a good command of English. We've got an ideal geographic location, all these good things that have been spoken about. We do feel, though, from this is now our view, we still have a very disjointed approach as a country. Although you have a system somewhat that should ensure the opposite, and we had hoped that Operation Pakistan was going to answer this. Unfortunately, we are not there yet, but there is a very great deal of movement from where we're coming. Now, the problem, though, then there's the issue of the industry that remains very uninterested. In my opening slide, I said we'll call it so that we have a conversation here. We have an industry, 13,000 ship calls. Those calls all have something to do with South African cargo. And those ships are represented in the country. So why it is that we continue to battle to place our cadets on board, our seafarers on board those ships, is a very, very big difficulty. I, talking on behalf of government, can't comprehend that. But maybe it requires us to have a conversation. That's the reason we're here. The funding of the seafarer training, I know earlier we did discuss about this thing, but that seafarer training remains unresolved from a funding point of view. Now, then there is the system itself that is getting compromised. There's a big question about whether SAMSA is able to keep South Africa on the white list. SAMSA runs the entire training system for the country. SAMSA are here to answer, so the senior examiner in the room. Then the sustainability of the training institutions that we have. There's a HOD and CPUT in front of me here. We need to talk about how are we able to guarantee that this thing is going to hold for the future. Both the capacity, sustainability, because there's new training technologies, there's new thinking, then there's a human element with its own requirements. We need to make sure that the system itself does hold. Now, then there's a big question, the quality of the seafarer herself. They are the good qualities now. We've been told that we produce highly intelligent individuals, South Africans, Rainbow Nation, and all these good things. We have good pockets of good work ethic. You command very good English. That's the selling point. We chose to call this other quality the bad. We rate very lowly in technical knowledge compared to the counterparts that we compete with. We had an experience a month and a half or so ago. We had this seafarer employer coming in for the first time. They do trade in the country. They needed, let's say, 30 cadets. So firstly, the system we have cannot find these cadets. We know they are there, but we can't find them. SAMSA train them, they don't know where to find them. FUCA, SAMSA, CPUT, DUT, we all don't know where to find these people, but we train them. So that's the service we do into this industry. Anyways, we find who we could find, and then we take them through this process. Now they had to write a computer-based assessment. The 30 that we found quickly dwindled to a smaller number. So eventually, because if you don't pass there, and they ask you a simple geographic question, which side is east, which side is west, and all these good things. We failed there, dismally. The handful that made it then had to first go to the actual interviews. And they pulled your standard SAMSA examination, and they were asking these questions there. Where's Panama Canal? All these common knowledge things. Now, those numbers were reviewed from 30 to 16 to 8. Eventually, they interviewed 4 people. Now, those were guaranteed the jobs. Only one passed. So that is the quality of people that we're producing. So it can be that at least the 30 people that we started with, because the one that made it just scraped through. In fact, they said no, they will need to take him somewhere first so that they bridge the gap. So there is something seriously gone wrong with the quality of people that we produce. So we've got training institutions here. That is why I said we will have to have this very, very direct conversation today and decide how we progress it and how we solve these problems. Then there is an issue of low rate of retention, where another employer, they were taking a whole lot of cadets. In fact, we've had an issue where cadets just jumped off a ship, get to a port in Saldanha Bay, and this guy decided, I want nothing to do with this, so they left the ship. because they knew that they were signing off and then things changed. No, they're not going to handle that. Now, this is the reputation we've created for ourselves as a country. There is a good reputation. We need to acknowledge that. It's in the balance that we're starting to worry. And then there's issues of laziness, generally, you know. This whole issue of entitlement, whether it is then getting into laziness on others, it is a quality of our seafarers that we need to talk to. So I'm talking about the lack of jobs, but I'm talking about the difficulties when we even find those jobs. And that is the problem that we need to deal with. And then there is this thing that I call the ugly, where people getting kicked off the program because once Dacha was decriminalized, they thought now we can smoke and be merry, you know that. Now, what happens, because the drug sits in your system, not like alcohol, where you sober up tomorrow, you can go back to work. It sits for a time period. Now, it didn't wear off before this one guy, in fact, it's not one. I think Peter can talk to these numbers. In fact, then I call this, I get involved, maybe I must put myself there. So what happened is, no, he knew that this thing is now legal, so it's not a problem. So what drives you to drive Dacha in the first instance? But the point is, people just don't realize how valuable that job is to themselves, because afterwards they're phoning you every second day, please place me again. But they don't realize the reputation they create for the South African seafarer over and above themselves. So it's fine if you mess up with your job, but what about everybody else that comes after you? Now, that is the issue. And then we have something that I really can't explain. You got an assessment, you less than adequate here, please go do this work. No, they're not going to go back and do the work. They change the entry in the assessment book to be acceptable. Now this thing gets caught, and what do you do with those seafarers? So that is the issue that I thought, just as I finished there, I thought there's an issue that we must discuss there to have a compact for the future. There is a need for an integrated system, and we just put this issue there. There's a requirement for funders to fund. This thing's not going to drive it, so we need to find this money. And it is our view that given all the spending for the country, we really are not asking for a lot of money to fund this training. We have a very, very good still reputation, and we've got very good links with those that want to employ. But there has to be a guarantee. Where is the money coming from? Then you're not scratching your head when the opportunity arises. Do you want me to jump off the podium? Give me 2 more minutes, then I'll be done. And then the trainers must train. There is a need for us to develop the training capacity, particularly in the Tibet training system. We need to have this dialogue. Where are we locating our Tibet colleges? And because the cost of training is largely driven by your private service providers, but there is an institution that is that conforms to government funding requirements. How are we using that? And then within that, trainers must train. There is a need for the training to be futuristic. The absorption has been seafaring, only cargo trading mainly, but there's offshore, there's a whole lot of other things now that need to be taken into account. Now, that whole system must be underpinned by some foundational principles. We list them. To produce good quality seafarers, we attempt to define what does good quality mean, and I think we all need to put in place this definition. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thought we would put that. I hope it was thought-provoking enough, but we think that it sets the basis for the discussion that Madam needs to run for now. Thank you very much.